Thank you all for coming along this evening. My name's Tanya Seghatchian, and I'm a trustee here at the Almeida and a producer. And this is Ian Rickson, who probably needs no introduction to you, although he is directing the show Against, which is on tonight, and has been running at the Almeida. I'm particularly privileged to talk to Ian today because I'd say my theatre-going career has been profoundly shaped by his work. I think we're of the same generation where the shows Ian did were the shows that I went to see, and my understanding of new writing is probably entirely formed by watching shows that Ian put on. So I just want to declare my allegiances up front. Ian, when we were walking around outside, I said to you that I was jealous of you because this was a home, and that to me, the theatre always feels like a home. Can you tell me if you agree with that?
Theatre is full of orphans and full of children who had very complicated childhoods, and they gravitate to theatre often to find a kind of vicarious community. And most of the best work comes out of a group that has that feeling of belonging. But what I said to you when you said that, as you observed a little interaction I had with an actress who was in the show, was, yeah, but no one belongs, because it's also full of people, well, I'll speak for myself, jockeying for position, feeling insecure, feeling kind of maybe outside a club, and that tension can sometimes, if you use it correctly, really inflame and engage you with the work you do. But it's not a cozy belonging by any means.
So how do you get the confidence to dream that you can begin in theatre? I mean, why did you think you would be a theatre director? How did you start? Where did you get that confidence from? Or compulsion from? I don't know which it was in your case.
I could have been a teacher. I would quite like to do that. I do still do that. But I have a bit too much ego to be a teacher. So I like to make a piece of work, but to make it in a way that is facilitative and inspiring for the whole room, most of all for me, because I'm doing it. And theatre directing is a great version of those things. If you are, for me, inclined to, it doesn't make me a good person, nurture and empower, that's one way you can be a director. There are all sorts of amazing directors who don't do that, who work in a different way. But I love being in a room, channeling a play, and trying to get as deep inside it as possible with fellow travellers, the actors, the creative team. I find that so delightful, amazing, challenging, and I'm so glad I do it. But going back to your question, as to how confident I am and all that, that's much more amorphous to me. Sometimes I don't feel confident. That's a projection.
And do you need to project it in
Yes.
that rehearsal space? I mean,
Yes.
like what happens? I want to come back and ask you how you pick which play to work on, but actually I'm sort of trying to think about the casting process and the first day in rehearsal and what it is you have to bring into that room, having now declared to the cast, to the playwright, to the theatre, that this is the thing you're going to shape.
I mean, not to put any directors off, but there is a performance element to directing. And the part you're performing is somebody who knows what they're doing, who feels clear and open. And you're sometimes acting that part when you feel buffeted by something that's happening in the room or cloudy in your vision. And it is your job, like a good parent, I think, to project a kind of calm, and we've got time, and together we're going to get there. But that can be performative.
Wow, you project the calm and you say we've got time.
I think the gift of time is so important because when you are tense, your thinking speeds up and you can emit that to the actors and it closes the creativity down. And even if you've only got an afternoon to pull some benefit together, or you've got 3 days left and you haven't really rehearsed that new scene, the magic trick of creating time is really important, I think. I mean, it's an interesting thing in all professions, isn't it? How a footballer is with time on the ball, the space they can see. How an actor is, the best actors, you look at them. And somehow time expands into a kind of heightened present where you're not really looking at your watch. But I'm sure good nurses create a feeling of space and time, as do architects and, you know, all sorts of people.
Yeah, I realised it sounds so obvious because obviously that's what you're doing. You're letting people feel safe and free. But, you know, in my world, certainly on screen, every day on set, every minute costs money. And that sense of the pressure of time and the speed at which you have to achieve the shot sometimes doesn't allow for the kind of thriving creativity that I think you need to create or you do create in rehearsal. But also, you're asking people to sustain a performance every night and to pace it every night, and that presumably has its own challenges as well.
Yeah, you're trying to nourish, prepare and stoke up the engine of each actor in a way that will last them through a run. Sometimes that run can be 2 years. And the care and support, and also the kind of letting go that's required to allow them to be adult and not dependent is sometimes complicated. If you really commit to those people, the letting go, because the analogy is quite like when you've got to opening night, you're releasing them as an adult. They don't need you anymore. I think on this I found that really difficult on this show. But, I mean, you look at films...
Why?
I felt really close to the actors, and I felt like the process had been really profound. 12 actors, a new play, and I felt a sort of mourning on opening it, as well as a kind of pride. I think I still feel it at this moment.
Well, I mean, I think I don't know how many of you have seen the play, and we're going to avoid talking about it because if you haven't and you're seeing it tonight, we don't want to spoil anything for you. But I might ask you a little bit about how you came onto it and about working with Ben Whishaw in particularly, who is the lead in the play.
Well, I would say an exciting thing as an artist is to think about how you nourish and energize yourself as an artist. For me, there's a musical input, so I am lucky to work with PJ Harvey, Kate Tempest. That gives me such vitality. There's a mind input through working with Susie Orbach, through reading various texts. There's the playwright's input, working with new writers. There's the classical input. And then there's the actor input. And if you have a sort of flowing, mixing my metaphors, if you have a kind of constellation around you of those things, it can be so empowering. And anybody can create those constellations just by your passion and your openness. I put on Chris's first play at the Royal Court in 97. I'd then put on 3 more of his plays. I love him as a writer, but I'd never directed one. And luckily, the management here of Rupert and Rob sent me the play. It was quite an easy yes. Then, you know, it's all quite common sense. You've got this recipe, the play, and you get your ingredients, and you needed on this play a really key major ingredient, and I love Ben Whishaw. He would be one of a group of actors that are part of that tributary of actors that I want to work with. He's very open, permissive, hardworking, warm, and he has that kind of thrumming majesty in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think both of us were sort of circling around the play, and the day President Trump was elected, I said, look, I'm going to do this play because it feels important. And he said, yeah, I'm with you. So that kind of incited the thing for us to happen.
You know, with Ben, I think he has a quality as well, which is that he's a sort of angel, that there is something mesmerising about him, and that you believe every thought process that he shares with you. And I don't know how much of that was a part of an exploration that you went through together in rehearsal, or is that what he brings to the table?
I think that's just him. Mm-hmm. I can't claim any credit. I mean, you have to allow a kind of forge in the room where you all make this thing and look at every detail and keep mining and processing together. And if you've got someone in the middle of that who becomes the company leader, it's usually the lead actor or actress, they can so help you create the right dynamic, which he does. He inspires companies. And I think something I love about him in this play particularly is he's not just this, you use the word angel, he's not just light and numinous and open. He's really kind of virile and conflicted. I think he sort of can do anything. I think it's such a privilege to have him in this play. And I think for me, I'm trying not to get in the way of him. I'm trying not to get in the way of him and the play. So there's no set. This is the set, 10 chairs. It's just the actor and the word, which I'm sure to many is boring. But for me, if you've got good actors and a great play, you don't need anything else, because we'll charge up, hopefully, the imaginative psychological space of the audience by not colouring it and crowding it too much.
So if we go back to the writing, with Chris Shin, the playwright of Against, you, as you said, you started, you've known his work for 20-odd years and staged him at the Court. With someone whose work you don't know, with new writers or a new play, what's the experience of reading, and how do you know? What are you looking for? When do you know?
Well, that's your job as well, isn't it? I mean, this
why
is the person who realised Harry Potter could become a movie, and probably you read 20 screenplays a month, don't you?
More than that, but but sadly, I think I know what I'm looking for, which is usually an unfamiliarity and originality of voice. It doesn't necessarily mean it's something that's stageable. But you've recommended playwrights to me over the years who have gone on to be spectacular playwrights, and people at the beginning of their careers as well. And I know you've got a very particular eye, which I think is specific to your taste, but also just able to identify talent. But I don't know what the difference between selecting something to put on in a theatre is and selecting something to direct yourself. And I'm curious about, particularly when you ran the Court, how you chose which ones you were going to direct yourself.
I mean, the Court is easier because the Royal Court has a mission, which is to be original, contemporary and challenging. And it's sort of not about me, it's just about that mission, and I'm just piggybacking on that narrative. I find it much harder to be freelance, and I'm finding even this incident, being with you, confusing, because I really don't like exhibiting myself in any way. I just want to hide behind the play and find work that I feel is urgent and engaging with who we are now. That might be a play by Sophocles, or it might be a new play. And I think work that hits me in the gut and also is challenging. But I think I'm the worst culprit. This is one of the most distracted ages. To just find the clear space to respond to the word, to turn off your computer or your phone or the clutter of life and have a really active relationship to a text, I find a challenge. But when I do that, and sometimes I have to physically remove myself to a place with no Wi-Fi, with no people, I find I make better decisions because I'm not just responding as me, I'm sort of tapped into something more in the collective unconscious. I think that's what the theatre is. This space we're in now is an old church hall. People gathered here. It has the kind of footprints and the ghosts of a congregation. And I think, however flawed theatre is, there is something about coming into the dark together, leaving in the light, having gone through the thing the writer does, which is a sort of shamanic thing, pulling from what's in the air, warning us about what might be to come. That is such an amazing thing to be part of.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'm sorry that you're finding it difficult because you want to hide rather than expose, but I know that it's giving me a great opportunity to actually force you to expose, and I can't often do that, so having an audience is great because it means he has to answer the question rather than turn it on me. So thank you for that. But you did say early on that, you know, in a sense that the difference between teaching and directing was about, you know, having enough of an ego to want to bring that to the table. And I'm curious about that because your style seems to me to be gentle and quiet, tough. I'm not saying that it isn't that, but that you don't exhibit your ego, or you've never really exhibited your ego publicly. And I don't know, how necessary do you think that is, and how difficult was it, for example, taking on the court after Stephen Daldry, who's a much more showier director. I love and adore Stephen, worked with him, and that's not to suggest that that doesn't also bring his qualities to the table, but he's a more flamboyant personality, and I'm curious about whether following on from somebody with that kind of personality is an easy or difficult thing to do, and how you address those sorts of challenges.
Well, I kind of worshipped Stephen. I was his associate. I felt intimidated to follow him. I would watch him run events and lead the theatre, and I'd think, as an introvert, and he's a prime extrovert, he can just manage a room with no depletion at all. I mean, he can have interaction A and like a bee draw honey from it, and then he's doing C, D, E and F, and by the time he's got to sort of S, T, U and V, he sort of even seems more radiant, whereas I need more reflection and contemplation. But there's no, let's just be clear, it's egotistic of me to pursue my aesthetic, which might be apparently hiding behind it. There's still ego involved. I just, that's what I like. And also I have a kind of constitutional ideology, which is the writer is the primary artist. And I'm sure Rob and Rupert here would disagree with that, but I think, and they're great artists, but for me, it's all about how the interpretive artists, the actors, the designer, the director, most deeply and intensely release the primary artist, the writer. Now that could be Conor McPherson or Patrick Marber, or it could be Chekhov. But I love that job of, I don't find it a servitude, I find it incredibly creative doing that. And I think that's the mistake that my German friends from the auteur tradition in continental Europe see that position as being essentially servile, that you're not the primary artist. I love it.
Well, I remember having an email correspondence with you where I asked you to get me tickets for one of your shows or something, and you emailed me back quite tersely saying, why do you only ever ask me tickets for my shows, and we don't see each other at other times? And I emailed you back and said, well, that's because I love everything you do, and I always want to see your shows. And I realised at that point that I probably hadn't explained that you were in many ways the unifying thing that drew me to those particular productions, so that even though you were the writer's voice was coming out, or the designers or the artist on the stage, that actually I liked your interpretation of the work. And I wondered what it's like if you go and see plays that you have directed, revived under other directors, whether you go and see plays you stage when other people direct them, or you stay away from them, and how it is to go back to a play that you've done, say like Mojo, and revive it again after a distance of time, and what you learn about yourself through that.
I feel very possessive of the plays I've directed if they're new, and I wouldn't be against seeing other interpretations, but to be honest, there haven't been that many. So many of the plays I directed at the Royal Court were not successful. No one's directed The Sweetest Swing in Baseball by Rebecca Gilman, again. But I loved making that play. When you go back and do something, it's really exciting because the imperative is to make it better. And because you've kind of climbed that mountain, so you've got you've got a knowledge of the contours to get up there, and you can use that going back to it. So naturally, Mojo is a good example, but I think the second production of that play, boring, I won't go on about it, but I think was so much better than the first, purely because I had grown as an artist. I think I was less interested in exhibiting myself and really understood the playwright and what the play needed. Yeah. And I had Ben Whishaw.
All comes back to the central point. So, you know, you talked about worshipping Stephen. I wonder of the assistants or the associates who you brought along, how they reacted to you and what you're like as a teacher to directors who come in your shadow. I also have to say, I don't quite know how it works as an assistant director in a theatre. I don't know what it is that the assistants or the associates do.
It's such an important role. I mean, you have it in film, don't you? The first AD is a really key role. But they're as much a kind of incredible organiser, aren't they?
Yeah, that's very much about process, and I don't know whether that's the same in theatre or if it's different.
Rufus Norris was my assistant, as was Lindsay Turner. I had lots of really good assistants. I take it very seriously. It's the only person really that sees you metaphorically naked, because you're in a way quite isolated. You're trying to create this team, but you're necessarily outside. And so you've got a little team of two, you and your assistant, who you hope in the break or at the end of the day might give you a little bit of encouragement. It doesn't always happen.
Encouragement or honesty?
I tend to prefer validation at all costs. But actually, I think that is wrong, because when you get banal praise, which you think you want, and generalized gratification and compliments, doesn't really fill you up. I think what you do want is the other side of your dichotomy. You want truth and connection. And they're the best assistants, really, who warmly engage with you in a very true way. Because it's McDonald's, really, the praise and any reverence. It's not going to fill you up. You can't really nourish yourself from it.
And are you aware of that when you're giving notes or when you're giving direction as well? I mean,
that's really interesting.
Because if you know what you need, do you know what they need, or does everyone need something different? You know,
that's really a big issue, isn't it? Are you divvying out what you really long for back? Somebody told me about a director who I really respect, and they said, you know, he never praises. And I said, oh, so what's that like? And they said, it's really good because it's just about the work. And I said, that makes me feel like a big generalized windbag of praise. Because I do praise a lot, partly because I'm excited, but I'm aware of the insecurity of the process. And if you're creating a room where people are able to be vulnerable, I think some encouragement does help. But I think you have to be careful of your superlative quotient. And if you just spray around amazing, fantastic, etc., the actor, like the child, when the parent is sort of saying, well, that's an amazing picture, and you know actually that picture you drew isn't amazing, you start to devalue real praise. So I think I have to be careful about... perhaps you didn't... we're going into quite a complex area here.
Sorry.
I'm sorry if it's...
And do feel free to ask your own questions if you think...
So I'm managing how much I do that, is the answer. Yeah.
But I realise as well, you know, the only other calibrator is you can feel the audience at the end of a show. I assume you can tell. I mean, can you tell whether the applause is real or unreal? Can you? I always wonder in the audience if it's apparent to the actors and the director.
Do you know what? It's not about the applause. That's like the least interesting thing, because the play works. It's quite hard to applaud, unless it's a great production of Run for Your Wife or something. So it's usually about the silence and the listening, and you can tell that. Like, you are a brilliant listener. I can feel it. And if a play's working well, even if it's got a group who aren't really here for the play, who are subscribers, who've been brought under sufferance, if you win them over, you can feel it in the quality of listening. So it's not about the applause of standing ovation. Frequently, that can be weak. Doesn't mean the play hasn't worked. And the shows where people just bomb up and do it doesn't always mean they're good.
But I think that listening is to do with curiosity, isn't it? And I don't know.
How do you cultivate that?
I don't know, because I was hoping you'd tell me. Because I think it's the most important. It's what I look for in actors, and it's what I hope a writer will engender when I read them. And
is it a learnable skill?
Well, you've turned it on me, haven't you?
Yeah.
But that's not because you're curious, it's because you're hiding.
No, I'm not hiding. I mean, I think it is a learnable skill.
Who taught you? Or who did you learn it from? Family?
Interesting people.
But
my family weren't curious.
Okay, but
I became curious in opposition to their fearfulness. So they presented me with the opportunity to be curious by being very fearful about the outside world and people.
Well, Ian, thank you very much for doing it at the Almeida, for sharing your thoughts with us today, and for everything else that you've done for us.
Thank you very much for coming.